Hi everyone. For those who might not know me, my name is Catherine and I'm 34 years old and a mom of two. My first is 3.5 and my second is just turned 8 months old. You can ignore this cut. I was just playing with my son and a little accident happened, so it's all good. I wanted to share this journey, not only to document it for myself, but for the main reason was when I was in the darkest place that I found myself ever being in my entire life, after my second was born, I was so sure that nobody had ever felt this bad before in their entire life. And I felt really alone in that, and I felt like I couldn't talk to people about how I really felt. And so my hope or my dream in putting this out there would be that maybe someone would see it and be reminded that they're not alone, that there are other people who have felt that way and gotten past it to a place where you're actually happy again. So that's my goal. So I'm going to tell you the story, and yeah, feel free to leave any questions or comments below. So I have a couple notes here because I wanted to make sure to bring in some details of the story that I think are important. My first pregnancy started in 2018 and he was born in July 2019 was pretty uneventful, positive pregnancy. I remember, the ups and downs of kind of every pregnancy, but nothing really dramatic. The birth went super well. And the after, the postpartum period, I did have baby blues. I do remember crying when watching The Price is Right. But after 2 weeks, that kind of feeling went away and I felt a lot better, and I kind of that was the end of it. And I remember when I got pregnant with my second in September of 2021, being almost looking forward to, okay, I know what's coming this time. I'm prepared for the baby blues. I'll remind myself of that and kind of be able to power through and feel even better mentally this time. So that's what I thought would happen. Turns out that my second pregnancy with Lujo, so his name is Louis Joseph, but we just call him Lujo because it's easier for everybody. It was a lot more challenging. So in the first trimester, I lost about 13 pounds because I had hyperemesis, which is when you're just like severely nauseous all the time. And I had a ton of muscle pain in the second trimester. And then I had this thing called lightning crotch constantly. I don't know the medical term for lightning crotch, but it was super uncomfortable. And I even everybody was saying he's gonna come early because he was quite a big baby. He's gonna come early, he's coming early, he's low, and things like that. But I went past my due date. I think I sat at 5 centimeters dilated for over 2 weeks. And it got to the point where I was so unbelievably uncomfortable. I just was at this point excited for the baby to come. I was always nervous, but at this point I was like, let's just get her done because I need to have my body back. I wasn't sleeping. There was no sleeping position that was comfortable. So I was really looking forward to kind of just getting the show on the road. So on Saturday, May 14th, it was actually a super hot day out in Toronto. And I was sweating a lot, and without getting into over detailed, I was concerned that my water had broken. It had leaked. So I texted my friend who I know went through a similar situation. She's like, yeah, you should probably go to the hospital and get checked, because if your water is broken, you have about 24 hours to give birth so that there's no risk of infection. So I didn't want to take that risk. So I decided, you know what, I don't want to call my mom to come and watch our toddler just yet and things like that. So I said, I'll just go to the hospital on my own. I was feeling totally fine. And everything was ready. All the bags were ready. So I just wanted to go on my own and just check because they can do a little test. So I went to the hospital. Thankfully, it was not busy. And after, an hour or two, the OBGYN came in and did the test to check. And she came back and she said it was inconclusive. So what that meant basically was they didn't detect it, but they can't say for sure. So I was like, okay, I'll go home, right? And she said, no, we're not gonna let you go home because since we're not sure, we don't want to take the risk that it is broken, so we're going to induce you. And it's so funny because I had been dying to go into labor, to, like I said, just get the show on the road. But when she said to me, like, yeah, I know you're going to have this baby like tonight or today, I was like, oh, no, like not yet. So I told her, listen, like, I've already got plans. It was game 7 for the Leafs that night, and I really wanted to watch the game and order pizza, you know, like I don't, and she was like, that's great. No, you're having a baby. So I kind of accepted at one point that I was having the baby. So called my partner, and he called my mom, and my mom came over to watch our other son, and my husband joined us. And during that time, the OB and I kind of went over the plan of, or she shared with me, like, this is what we're thinking that we're gonna do. So we'll induce you and yada, yada, yada. So when I was a first-time mom, I just said, okay, great, right? But now as a second-time mom, I knew I could kind of speak up and advocate for myself. So I said, okay, like, so great. I want an epidural. And she's like, oh yeah, you can get an epidural, just ask for it. And I'm like, no inducing until I get my epidural. So she was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to ask. So they asked, and I guess it was okay. So I was really excited about that because, you know, to each their own, but I love me an epidural. So I was really excited about the fact that I was going to get an epidural ahead of time this time, because with my first, it was after several hours of extreme pain. So I got the epidural. Everything was going super well. The epidural was a little bit more painful this time though, because I think because I wasn't in active labor, things feel more painful, whereas last time I was in so much pain it felt like nothing. Everything was going super well. They initially do like a little pow of the epidural medicine to get your body used to it. And I remember telling our labor nurse that I wasn't feeling well. And I said to her, is it normal that I feel drunk? And I have so much respect for nurses, but I think this nurse was a little bit out to lunch that day, or maybe every day. I wasn't too pleased, but anyways, not part of the story. And she said, yeah, it's super normal. And I was like, okay, because I feel wasted. And I've had an epidural before and I don't remember feeling wasted. And she's like, no, it's normal. And then boom, lights out. I passed out. And I guess I remember coming to, and there was like so many doctors around me, and I had a mask on and everything like that. So the first initials like push of epidural medicine, I guess, kind of sent my blood pressure all the way down. Yeah, that's what happened. It just like plummeted. So supposedly when I woke up from me blacking out, and the doctor was like, are you okay? And I was like, what's the score? Because we were watching game 7 when I blacked out. Anyways, so that was the only hiccup in the delivery. And hiccup, like whatever you think. I was, like I said, it didn't really stress me out too much because I felt really, really comfortable with the doctors there. So after that, everything went super well. He didn't move down, like when they checked me again after a couple hours, he was still at 5 centimeters. So I was worried a little bit that the epidural had kind of stopped the delivery. But when I just they moved me positions, and then boom, it was 10 centimeters, like less than a minute later. Like he just bam, went right down. So they actually had to be careful. And when the OB was ready, we just kind of had to actually slow down the pushing. All that to say, I think, like, aside from, you know, blacking out from the epidural, it was a really positive birth experience. I had less than a 2nd degree tear. I had a 2nd degree tear the first time, so I was kind of worried about having more, but it was like a 1st degree tear this time. And I actually felt so good that I gave birth to Lujo around 2 a.m. and we left the hospital at noon. Because I know some people feel a lot of comfort staying at the hospital, but I personally kind of wanted to get out of there. I don't like the hospital environment. I know it's their job, but I don't like the nurse coming in like every hour. So I just wanted to get home. I was itching to get home. I felt great. I was walking, like uncomfortably, but I was walking, and I felt so good. Like I was taking pictures, I was texting people. And I was just so excited, I guess, to go into it this time not being blindsided by things. Shocker. I was about to be. So I went home and the baby met my eldest, Norman, and it was a really, really good day. Now, it was a typical first night with the newborn, and especially the second night, they tend to kind of wake up a little bit more. And so he was up a ton every hour or two or whatever is normal. My first was a very sleepy newborn. Lujo was not. He was very much awake. So I didn't get almost any sleep the first 2 or 3 nights. I was really kind of running on getting these little cat naps everywhere, which contributes to what was about to happen. And then on Wednesday, so he was born on Sunday, and then on Wednesday, I was just hanging out with my eldest when he got home from school, and the baby started crying. And something just popped in my head, and it said, "You can't handle this." That's literally what just popped in my head. You can't handle this. And that's where it all started. It all started from there, and then that thought just grew and grew and grew in my head, and I started to really not feel well physically, actually. So Wednesday evening, our eldest had gone to bed. It was around 8 or 9 o'clock, and I put the baby down in the crib because I noticed I was starting to get dizzy. So I put the baby down in the crib. My husband was on the phone with his friend, and I went to walk out into the hallway to call for him, and the room started spinning, and I collapsed to the ground. I remember my husband turning me over, and I was kind of in a daze. He says it was almost like I was frozen in that state for a little bit, and I could hear him, but it was almost like underwater, like he was talking to me like I was underwater. I couldn't really hear too much. And then after a couple minutes, I came out of it, and I just was like, whoa, that was weird, right? Like thinking, okay, lack of sleep, maybe not eating enough. I'm dehydrated from breastfeeding so much and maybe not drinking enough water. So again, kind of brushed it off, thinking that, maybe it's some sort of after effect that I didn't experience the first time, and kind of kept going. That night, again, horrendous evening in terms of like no sleep again. So again, now I'm running on several days of extremely minimal sleep, which contributes a lot to this mental downfall that I'm having. And then on Thursday, that's when things get really, really dark, and I start thinking about hurting myself. It starts with just the feeling of, feeling of wanting to run away, and how can I figure out how to run away and things like that. And then it starts getting a little bit darker where I'm like, I don't want to run away. I just don't want to be here. I don't want to be here anymore. And I start to feel like I don't want the baby anymore. I never felt the inkling. I know it can be part of it to feel like a desire to hurt the child, and I would fully share with you if I had those thoughts. I never had any desire any inkling to hurt Lujo. It was more I just felt completely disconnected from him suddenly. Like that overwhelming passionate love that I had for him was completely gone. And I felt nothingness towards him, like as if I was taking care of someone else's baby. That's what it felt like, that I was burdened with this. And I was sharing this with my partner, and I said to him, I can't believe I said these words, but I was like, he looks really racially ambiguous. So I feel he would fit in with a lot of other families, and I said we could put him up for adoption, and we could make it an open adoption. And my husband's like looking at me like, what is going on? But I was dead serious. And I started telling him that I'm having some bad thoughts, and I was sharing with him how I don't want to be here, and I didn't want to scare him with the idea that I was thinking of hurting myself, but I did share with him that I was not doing well. And throughout this time, my parents were coming over, and my parents were there, and my partner was taking the baby more because I did continue to faint. So obviously nobody wanted me holding the baby. So throughout Thursday, the day, I think I fainted 3 times. So obviously I wasn't holding the baby, and anytime I fed him, I was sitting down. But I started to get a clue of when these fainting spells would happen, because I would get very, very, very dizzy, and that's when I knew it was starting. And then it would all of a sudden just go, like, I would wipe out, and I would kind of pass out, and I would be in this daze. It almost felt like being like drugged or something like that. That's what it felt like. And then on Thursday evening, that's when I was laying in the bed. Someone else had the baby, and I was laying in my bed, and I remember I came up with a plan of how I would end my own life. And I used to work at an agency called Kids Help Phone, and we were trained in what's called ASSIST, so it's like a suicide intervention. And we learned how to assess people who are feeling suicidal. And one of the key things to ask is, do they have a plan in place? And that obviously takes it, like, there's thoughts, and then if there's thoughts, do you have a plan? Do you know when? Do you have access to the things that you would need in order to put this in place? And the answer to all of that was yes. And so it takes the severity and the concern to another level. So obviously this was going through my mind. Thankfully I knew that information, and I knew, okay, this is getting very, very serious. And so I went to see my partner, and I told him that I was having these thoughts, and that I now had a plan to hurt myself. And I really wanted to stop feeling the way I was feeling. I couldn't, it's hard to think about now, but in my mind at the moment, I do remember thinking, I'll never be happy again, never. And nobody has ever felt this horrible before. Nobody has ever felt this disconnected from their baby before. I felt like a horrible person. I felt guilty for not being more grateful. I felt all kinds of emotions. And so I just felt like it was no longer worthwhile to be around. And I know my people have different feelings about suicide and around that, but for me, I can tell you in the moment, and I remember I journaled a lot, and I've read the words that I wrote. I really felt like I would do people a favor if I wasn't here, that I would do my boys a favor if they didn't have to be around me, and do my partner a favor if he didn't have to be around me. I just remember thinking, no, it would be a good thing. It would be a good thing if people didn't have to deal with me. And I was so certain of it, so certain. But I'm so grateful that I had the clarity to tell someone, because if I hadn't told somebody, I really do think something would have happened. So strictly knowing and going back to my schooling and knowing how serious it was at that stage, that I can't brush off the fact that I have a plan now. And I told him, he took me to the hospital. He took me to Emerge right away, because, you know, he doesn't work in the field, but his family all do. And they said if it gets anything like that, you need to take her to someone else. Like, you can't watch her 24/7. So they took me to the hospital to Emerge, and they also mentioned the fainting, because I was still fainting. So they hooked me up to everything, and then I had a fainting spell while I was there. And so my husband asked kind of what their feeling was in terms of why this was happening. And based on their watching the monitors and things like that, and a bunch of people looking at it, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, everybody, they actually felt like it was in the end, these severe fainting spells were panic attacks. And it's true that I would start to get dizzy when a certain thought would pop in my head. It would be different every time, but often it was like, you can't handle this, or you're gonna ruin your kids' lives, or something like that would trigger it, and that's when I would start to get dizzy. So they said it was but it was actually the result of severe panic attacks, to the point where it was because they noticed my heart rate was getting super, super, super elevated before I would kind of pass out. So they just said it's her body's way of responding to this severe amount of, like, just shutting down. Your body is just shutting down, because the signals your brain is sending to it is that it's like you're in extreme danger, basically. So I was just completely shutting down. So I was, on the one hand, glad to have an answer to that. And then the doctor there, who is the psychologist on the emergency psychiatry team, they came to see me, and they did a very, very thorough assessment, both with my partner there, and they made my partner leave at one point as well, to ask me some questions. And then they prescribed me with Zoloft, starting at 50 milligrams, and some Ativan, because they said, you have to sleep. And I was like, I have a newborn. Like, how am I supposed to sleep? And so they came up with a plan, which includes formula, giving the baby formula and things like that, and how I could take the Ativan but still safely breastfeed at the same time. Like, they gave me the timeline of how to be able to do that. And at first I was super against it, and I didn't want to take the medication. I felt like it was a sign of weakness that I would have to go on medication. And it's funny to think about at this time, because I'm so pro do what you need to do for your mental health, and whether that's medication or not. So it's not like I'm anti-medication, but for me, it felt like it said something about me. So I felt not the best about that. And but thankfully, I decided after about a week of trying on my own to get better, and things just continuing to go downward, continuing to faint. At this point, my parents had moved in, and everybody was taking shifts to be able to give me some sleep, the sleep that I needed. But if you know about if you've experienced this, most likely you've also had insomnia. So throw in some insomnia, and I felt even worse, because now everybody's stopped their lives. My dad took time off work. My mom was living here, and I felt horrendous that everybody was giving up their time. And on top of it, I'm laying in the room staring at the ceiling. So not a great feeling. And I really felt for a long time, those suicidal thoughts stayed with me. They were very, very, very strong. And it didn't just go away. So thankfully, after about a week, I said, okay, I told my partner, I have to take the medication, because this is going to end badly if something doesn't change, because I was already pushing myself to get outside every day. I was pushing myself to get some movement. I was seeing the therapist every other day at that point, and things just weren't going in the right direction. So I did start on the medication, and I would say in that first period where I was honestly the lowest that I've ever felt in my entire life. And again, I was in that place where I don't know how anybody gets out of a hole this deep. I kept telling myself, there's no escaping this. There is no escaping this. You are too deep into this. You are never going to escape this, and you will ruin your family's life. That's honestly, blatantly what was going through my mind. And I had convinced myself that nobody needed me in their life, that my friends and my job and everything like that actually everybody was lying to me my whole life, and everybody would be better off without me. So I started the medication, and Ativan was a huge help. So the doctors helped me figure out how to take it and safely breastfeed. And so I did that. And I wanted to be very careful, because I know how addictive Ativan can be, because literally it felt like someone would come and take these thoughts and just put them away for a moment so I could breathe. I felt like someone just lifted 100-pound weight off my shoulders when I would take it. And that's quite an amazing feeling. And so I was taking a couple a day, 1 milligram, just one pill. But then after about 2 weeks, I noticed the 1 milligram wasn't doing as much anymore. And so I took 2 milligrams. And for me personally, and my partner's family works in the addiction field, I knew, okay, this is not going in the right direction. I actually need to wean off of the Ativan. So that's what I did. And so when I started feeling those uncomfortable thoughts, so those really bad thoughts, I felt like I was in a place at that point that I could try to work through them mentally rather than rely on the Ativan. So thankfully I was able to do that, because by that point I had been on Zoloft for about 2 weeks. I had terrible onset symptoms of taking Zoloft, which included even worse insomnia. And mentally I actually got worse for the first week, and headaches, things like that, nausea, definitely. And I almost gave up, but thankfully I read online that this can be part of it. So I kept going with it, and I'm so thankful for that, because I honestly think that it saved my life. And among other things that I was doing, so I was taking Zoloft, gradually went up to about 150 milligrams, and I was taking that every day. And going to therapy, I continued that. Once things got better on a weekly basis, I was exercising every day. That was extremely difficult, and I can tell you that every day it felt like the absolute last thing I wanted to do. It was horrendous just to get out of bed. So that took every ounce of strength in me. But I knew how important getting outside was, getting exercise and things like that. I asked for help. I asked my friends to come and visit me. And that was also extremely hard. And I was very forthcoming with them about what was going on. I didn't hide anything because I didn't honestly even have the capacity to hide. People would ask me how I'm doing, and I honestly either wouldn't answer or I would just tell them the truth. So friends would come by. That was really helpful. My sister brought a lot of food. She would come by regularly and bring food, which was extremely helpful, because I just wasn't eating. The idea of like making food just was like beyond me. So having food for my kids, things like that. And also having time alone, but not like in my dark room. But I would go outside and lay in the grass and do some deep breathing and things like that. So those things were all very, very helpful. And it was not a linear journey. So it's not like everything just like went like this from there. There were still some ups and downs, and they had me kind of plotting on a chart kind of where my mood was at every day. And I remember I started at a 0. It was like a 0 or a negative, because I was, like I said, I didn't think I was going to get out of this. And then slowly it was a 1 for a week, and then it was a 2, and then I made my way up to a 3. And slowly, and then some days it would go back to a 3, and it would go back to a 1. And it was disheartening, but I kept journaling and having faith that things would get better. And everybody kept telling me things would get better, and I didn't believe them. That's part of it. That's part of the postpartum depression, is not being able to believe that you will ever feel better again, that you could possibly ever be happy again. But I just kept telling myself and talking to people and reaching out through my social media account. That was also helpful to hear from other moms who had experienced postpartum depression. So just slowly and surely, I made my way through it. And at about 4 months postpartum, I actually was the happiest I have felt in years, honestly, in years. And I am so, I just pinch myself thinking about that, because again, of how helpless I felt and how sure I was that I would never be happy again, to go on only months later and feel better than I had ever. I did though make the mistake of, I decided to wean off the Zoloft, because number one, I was feeling good, but the main reason was because I was still having some symptoms. So some severe sweating, jaw clenching, and weight gain, and still like on and off headaches. So that was really, really hard for me. I would have to change clothes several times a day from the sweating. So I found that really challenging. I thought, oh, I'm doing well, and I went off. And then I saw the psychologist a few weeks later, because we had stopped seeing each other at that point, and I was just seeing my regular social worker. And then I saw them around December, and like beginning December, end of November, and I was explaining how irritable I was. My mood was okay, but I was unbelievably irritable. And she said, there's a reason why when you're experiencing postpartum depression, you are supposed to be taking the medication for at least 9 months. And it's because we know how long postpartum depression tends to take to fully recover, to be back on your own feet. So even though you're implementing the exercise and you're trying to get the endorphins and the serotonin in a different way, it's okay to need this boost, and you should commit to it for at least 9 months. Because irritability is a sign of postpartum depression, just like mood is. So with that, I decided I went back on that day, but this time I stuck at 100 milligrams, which lessened the symptoms. They're still there, so I still sweat a ton, and I still have the jaw clenching, but it's not as bad because I'm not at 150, but I know the alternative, and I'm feeling mentally way, way, way better again, so I'm just gonna stick with it this time. And yeah, so that's the story of everything that happened. And I'm still on my journey of recovery, I guess you could say. And I still have to be careful. I still have to monitor my mood. But I feel extremely connected to Lujo. I love spending time with him. Like any mom, I also love when they go to bed and I'm on my own. But I feel the love for him that I lost in the beginning. And something that this experience also made me realize was I kept saying, this came out of nowhere, this came out of nowhere, this came out of nowhere. But the more I've learned about postpartum depression, the more I realized that I actually had it with my first. So while I explained earlier that I had the baby blues and then I felt okay, I actually felt numb. I think when I think back about my experience, I felt disconnected from my first, and I did have a lot of fun moments, but I also think that I remember viewing it as like a project almost, something I think a lot of first-time moms can understand this. You want to do things well. You're just trying to do things right. You're trying to learn so much all at once. And so I think it almost kind of numbed me a little bit to actually enjoying the experience. And I remember a couple people saying that to me, like, you don't look like you're enjoying motherhood. And I would just tell myself that I'm just not like the mom type, and I'm sorry I don't just get all hyped up, right, about my kid. But now looking back, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe you weren't depressed in like the traditional sense of like you're down and you're crying and it's really obvious. But I think I got so good at just numbing myself and kind of moving forward and learning and just really doing everything I can to be a good mom in like a to-do kind of sense, and having everything done and having the right things and all of that and knowing all the information. But in terms of how I felt inside, I was very, very, very disconnected. And yeah, so it helped me learn from that experience as well, that how different postpartum depression can look for every person. So this is a long video, but if you or someone out there going through this experience or about to go through it, I guess my biggest hope is from someone who was in the depths of the despair and truly believed that the world was better off without me, and that I was really doing everybody a favor, and that I was never, ever going to get out of this dark hole. I believe that wholeheartedly. I can tell you that every moment of pushing myself through that, every moment of putting one foot in front of the other, every moment of just taking a deep breath and telling myself, you can do this, through the tears, was worth it. 1,000% worth it. And I can't imagine not being able to be here and experience this now. So you can get through this. It is something that it can be very, very challenging, but you do have the strength within you. And if you are having dark thoughts, you have to tell someone. And as terrible as it might feel, as guilty, embarrassing, sad, mad you might feel, telling someone is the most important thing, because it's the first step to getting that help that you need, because you can get through it. You will get through it. You will be in a place again where you can feel happiness, where you can laugh. And I'm just an example of that. And I can tell you, if you were anything like me and you watch someone who experienced that, you would say, that's great for her, but that won't be my case. And I said that for every single person who said they had also experienced postpartum depression. I said, great for you, that won't be the case for me. I will not be happy again. And obviously I was wrong. So I can tell you that's part of it. The helplessness is part of it, and you will move past it. So thank you for listening to my story. It is very, very long, I know, but I was hoping to put it out there someday. So here it is.